Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. Today and in the coming few lectures, we'll start to talk about the lymphatic system and the immunity. The objectives of today's session are to list the primary and secondary lymphoid organs or tissues and describe their functions, to define the hematopoietic stem cells, lymphoid lineage and myeloid lineage, and to define immunity and know its two subdivisions, innate and adaptive, or also called acquired immunity, and finally to compare and contrast the major features of innate versus adaptive immunity. The lymphatic system is a system consisting of lymphatic vessels through which a clear fluid that we call it lymph passes or flows. The major functions of the lymphatic system include draining interstitial fluid, transporting dietary lipids absorbed by the gastrointestinal tract to the blood, and facilitating the immune responses. The lymphatic system includes lymphatic capillaries, lymphatic vessels, the lymph nodes, the lymphatic trunks, and the lymphatic ducts, and then primary lymphatic organs as well as secondary lymphatic organs. So we have the lymphatic capillaries that drain into lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels will pass through lymph nodes and then to lymphatic trunks, lymphatic ducts, and we have also primary and secondary lymphatic organs. Lymph is a clear to milky fluid in the extracellular fluid compartment. Extracellular fluids, as you remember, include plasma, the liquid component of blood, the interstitial fluid, which is the clear fluid filtered through the capillary walls when it enters the interstitium. As you remember, every day 20 liters of fluid are filtered and 17 liters are reabsorbed. So there is fluid that is left in the interstitium that should be drained through the lymphatic vessels. So the lymphatic fluid is the unaltered interstitial fluid that enters the lymphatic vessels. And the GIT lymphatic fluids also include absorbed dietary lipids. The flow of lymph fluid is always from the periphery towards the central vasculature. As you can see here, we have afferent lymphatic vessels that drain or bring lymph to the lymph node, and then efferent vessels will carry lymph towards the central vasculature. It starts as interstitial fluid, then it enters the lymphatic capillaries, and then finally it travels in the lymphatic vessels to the regional lymph nodes, and then lymph ascends or descends to the thorax, either to the left or right lymphatic ducts that you already studied in anatomy, and then the lymph fluid final destination is the bloodstream as it enters through the subclavian veins. Here, if you remember in anatomy, we have two major lymphatic ducts, the right lymphatic duct and the left lymphatic duct or the thoracic duct that bring the lymph finally to the circulation. The lymph capillaries are slightly larger than blood capillaries and have a unique one-way structure. As you can see here, the lymphatic capillaries have blind ends and they also have one-way flow. Here we have the interstitial cells, and this is the blind end of the lymphatic capillary that is lined by epithelial cells or the endothelial cells of the lymph capillaries. As you see here, there is an overlap between the endothelial cells that will allow fluid to pass in one direction. There are also anchoring fibers that attach the endothelial cells to the peripheral cells, and once the interstitium is expanded or congested with fluids, this will pull on the lymphatic endothelial cells, so it will open the pores between the epithelial cells, allowing more lymph to flow into the lymphatic capillaries. So the ends of endothelial cells overlap and permit interstitial fluid to flow in but not out. So the flow of lymph is from the interstitium to the lumen of the capillary, but not in the opposite direction. Then anchoring filaments pull openings wider when the interstitial fluid accumulates or the interstitium is congested with fluids. There are specialized lymphatic capillaries called lacteals that we already mentioned in the gastrointestinal tract. They are present, or they are the core of the villi, and they take up dietary lipids in the small intestine. Chyle is the name of the lymph with lipids. So the lymph that flows through the lacteals in the small intestine is called chyle because it is rich in lipids. The lymphatic capillaries join or unite to form larger lymphatic vessels which resemble veins in structure but have thinner walls and more valves. Lymphatic vessels pass through lymph nodes, and the lymph nodes are encapsulated organs with masses of B and T lymphocytes and function as lymph filters. And we'll discuss them in more details in one of the coming slides. The lymphatic fluid is moved by pressure in the interstitial space and the milking action of skeletal muscle contractions, as well as the respiratory movement, in a similar way to the venous return. An obstruction or malfunction of lymph flow leads to edema from fluid accumulation in the interstitial space. So any obstruction or malfunction of the lymphatic vessels can cause edema, as we studied in the lecture of blood flow. As I said earlier, the lymphatic system also contains a number of primary and secondary organs and tissues widely distributed throughout the body, all with the purpose of facilitating the immune response. Examples of the primary and secondary lymphatic organs and tissues: the thymus, the lymph nodes, spleen, red bone marrow, and so on. The primary lymph organs are the bone marrow and the thymus, and they are primary lymph organs because they are the sites where stem cells divide and become immunocompetent or capable of mounting an immune response. The secondary lymphatic organs are sites where most immune responses occur, including the spleen and the lymph nodes, as well as other lymphoid tissues such as the tonsils and the lymphoid tissue that is present in the alimentary canal. The thymus slightly protrudes from the mediastinum into the lower neck. It is palpable in infants because it has a larger size and its mass is about 70 grams, and it atrophies by puberty. It is scarcely distinguishable from surrounding fatty tissue by old age. And as you see here, this is the location of the thymus. The thymus has an outer cortex that is composed of large number of immature T cells which migrate from their birthplace in the red bone marrow. The immature T cells will proliferate and begin to mature with the help of dendritic cells derived from monocytes and specialized epithelial cells. They help educate T cells through positive selection. Only about 25% of those immature T cells will survive. the inner medulla is composed of more mature T cells. So the cortex contains mainly immature T cells that arrive from the red bone marrow, and the inner medulla is composed of more mature T cells. Among the secondary lymphatic organs are the lymph nodes. There are about 600 lymph nodes scattered along lymphatic vessels in superficial and deep groups, and they mainly they serve as filters to trap and destroy foreign objects in lymph fluid. Important groups of regional lymph nodes include the submandibular lymph nodes, the cervical lymph nodes in the neck, axillary lymph nodes in the axilla, mediastinal lymph nodes in the mediastinum around the aorta, the bronchi and the esophagus, and the inguinal lymph node in the inguinal region. Lymph as a fluid enters the node through afferent vessels and is directed towards the central medullary sinus. As you can see here, that the lymph enters the lymph node from its surface through the afferent lymphatic vessels. Then efferent vessels convey lymph, antibodies and activated T cells out of the node at an indentation called the hilum. So here at the hilum we can see that the efferent vessels leave the lymph node. We can see that the lymph node contains germinal centers in the outer cortex that are rich in many immune cells, as we'll discuss these types of immune cells later on. The spleen is the body's largest mass of lymphatic tissue. The parenchyma of the organ consists of white pulp, which is composed mainly of lymphatic tissue where lymphocytes and macrophages carry out immune functions, and the red pulp, blood-filled venous sinuses where platelets are stored and all the red blood cells are destroyed. And as you see here, this is the internal or the visceral surface of the spleen. This spleen, as I said, is composed of white pulp, mainly lymphocytes and macrophages around the central arteriole, and red pulp that is composed of sinusoids, where platelets are stored and all the red blood cells are destroyed. Now let's talk about the hematopoietic stem cells, because these are stem cells that are present in the red bone marrow, and they are the precursor cells for all types of blood cells, including the immune cells, the different immune cells. As you can see here, the stem cell is called hematopoietic stem cell that is present in the red bone marrow, which is the factory for blood cells. The hematopoietic stem cells divide and can give me two lineages. One is the myeloid stem cell and the lymphoid stem cell. And as you can see, this happens in the red bone marrow. Then the myeloid stem cells will give me reticulocytes that are the precursors for the red blood cells. Megakaryocytes, these are giant cells that will give small fragments, and these are the platelets. And then it will give me the neutrophils or basophils and eosinophils, as well as the monocyte progenitors. And here the lymphoid stem cell can give me B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes in the thymus. Now each cell will give me the final cell or the mature cell. So the reticulocyte will give me mature erythrocytes in the blood, and the megakaryocytes will give me platelets, or will give me small fragments called the platelets that are important for the hemostasis, and the precursor for basophils and eosinophils will give me basophils and eosinophils, Then the granulocyte monocyte precursor will give me monocytes and neutrophils, and then I can get also from the lymphoid stem cells the B lymphocytes, the natural killer cells, and the T lymphocytes. All of them will enter the blood. The basophils, eosinophils will enter into the blood. Monocytes can be activated and become macrophages. Neutrophils also enter the blood, and one of the cells that arise from the granulocyte monocyte progenitor cells are the dendritic cells, and these are cells that have the ability to undergo phagocytosis. The immune response or immunity is the ability of the human body to resist almost all types of organisms or toxins that tend to damage the tissues and organs. We have two types of immune defenses. So the immune defenses of the body are classically subdivided into non-specific or innate immune response and specific, also called adaptive or acquired immune responses. As we can see here, immunity is subdivided into innate or inborn immune response and adaptive or acquired immune response. The adaptive or acquired immune response, as we'll see in the third lecture, is subdivided into cell-mediated immune response and antibody-mediated immune response. We have four different classes of pathogens that trigger or stimulate the two classes of the immune response. These are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. With this slide, we end our lecture today. Thank you very much for listening to the session and wish you a pleasant day. Thank you and goodbye.